The chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Braley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strickland, in your opening statement that we received, the written statement, on page 1, third paragraph, you wrote, "One of the first questions I asked when I became the administrator of NHTSA is whether our current statutory authority, drafted largely in the 1960s and 1970s, is sufficient to address the modern automobile and global automotive marketplace."
Yes, sir.
Have you answered that question?
That question is still being worked on by the staff. I have a great deal of experience in looking at consumer product safety statutes from my prior employ, and you have to be very careful in examining these things, in that we have to make sure that there is a lot in those statutes that are very functional and works well, and we want to look to improve upon a strong authority. And my staff, both my legal staff and my programmatic staff, are undertaking that work right now. When we've completed that work, we will be happy and excited to share our thoughts with the committee, and looking forward to working with you on a going forward basis.
And I look forward to having that conversation. And let me get back to one of my earlier points about the legacy of the agency that you now head.
Yes, sir.
Because in your statement you noted correctly that safety is the Department of Transportation's highest priority. And you stand by that statement today.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
And we know that the Office of Defect Investigation, often referred to by its acronym ODI, is on the front line of defect investigation and prevention as part of the Department of Transportation.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And Mr. Whitfield asked you a very appropriate question when he said you have mandatory recall power, and you answered yes. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
Can you explain to all of us then why your agency, NHTSA, has not initiated a recall since 1979?
Because you can often influence a recall by going through the initial stages of the process. Most times an automaker will not want to go through the full formal process. It takes approximately a year. It's a public process, and a lot of automakers, realizing they are facing public scrutiny of fighting a vehicle safety defect, and when they know that the agency can prove it, they will go forward and effectuate a voluntary recall. The universe is that most recalls are voluntary. All recalls since that period of time are voluntary. But there's a huge number that are influenced by this agency, and that's the actual number that one should look at. And we influence well over half of the recalls that are happening every year. So that's the real number, Mr. Braley, I think, that is indicative of the power of ODI. We don't have to get to a point where the administrator, after a year of public hearings and show cause hearings, has to sign an order. Automakers will go forward and take care of that recall voluntarily from ODI's work.
Well, count me as skeptical that in a 31-year period, there has not been an instance where automakers acted responsibly in every particular case responding to demand for recall of a product defect in a 31-year period. One of the things that I also want to talk to you about is how you described the agency's mission has changed in response to changes in the automotive industry. Do you remember that in your opening remarks?
I don't think I would call it a change in mission, but it's a change in how we have to approach the job because of the change in the marketplace. There was a time when America was the world's leader in automotive manufacture. We are no longer that leader.
Well, I'm talking about something different, so I want to make sure you understand.
I apologize.
Okay, when I was growing up, it was during the muscle car era,
yes, sir,
where you could tear apart a Chevy large block engine in your basement and put it back together, having a basic knowledge of the internal combustion engine.
Yes.
You cannot do that anymore. Would you concede that?
I agree. Yes, sir.
And one of the things that came out during our earlier hearing was this concept of black box technology that has crash data in it that is driven by complex computer code, sometimes which the manufacturer is willing to share with your agency, and sometimes manufacturers have been very reluctant to share that data or to provide an ability for your own employees to have the keys to the kingdom so that they can download and interpret that information independently. You would agree with that?
Yes, sir, I agree.
So one of the things that I'm concerned about is our own internal committee report for this hearing suggests that your agency's budget dedicated to vehicle safety has remained stagnant relatively over the past 10 years, and that your resources are far below the resources that were available for this type of investigation than when the agency was at its height. And my concern is, based upon some of the testimony at the previous hearing, when you have a demand for computer engineers and electrical engineers and people who are not based on mechanical backgrounds, I'm concerned that the level of funding and the staffing of personnel within your agency may not be adequate to meet the incredible demands of the changing technology of this automobile industry. Have you done an independent review since assuming responsibility to make your own independent judgment on whether or not that is a critical case we need to address?
I have a couple of responses to that, Mr. Braley. The work of ODI and the automotive engineers that do the work, they are some of the finest in the business in this country. And as the technology evolves, the experience of our investigators and our engineers also evolve. I can give you the quantum number of folks that we have on deck to do the job. We have 125 engineers of all of NHTSA. We have 5 electrical engineers. We have a software engineer. We have engineers that are based in our East Liberty, Ohio facility. We have resources for consultants when we need additional, expertise. And from my understanding, from what I know from when I've taken office, there is not a notion that we don't have the proper, expertise to handle today's automobile. I don't think that's the case at all. However, recognizing that you can always buttress what you have, the President has provided us resources to hire 66 new people, which we will use to leverage our resources and to buttress and strengthen those folks. In addition to, we will be looking at ways that how we can do longitudinal studies and long-range studies on these complex systems, as the Secretary spoke about in the prior hearings. Is my confidence that we handle the current marketplace with our expertise? Yes, we can. Can we be stronger in that area? Of course we can.
Of the 62 employees you've identified that are in the President's budget request, how many of those do you propose to allocate to ODI?
That's part of that. That's an undergoing process. I'm working with the career staff and with the Office of the Secretary to figure out what our resource needs would be in that area. I will be happy to come forward with that information when the decision is made.
Can you also provide the committee with a breakdown of the people working at ODI with engineering degrees by their names, their job titles, and what their particular expertise in terms of being a professional engineer is?
Be happy to do that, Mr. Braley.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I yield back.